Hey there. Well, the day is finally here. Toy Story Land has just opened on Saturday at Disney's Hollywood Studios, so I feel like it's a good time to talk about how the land looks and what it means for the future of Disney's Hollywood Studios. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hi, it's Dan, and this is episode 46 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. Today, I am focusing on the current state of Disney's Hollywood Studios now that Toy Story Land has officially opened to the public. We're in the middle of what is a massive expansion to Walt Disney World that we have not seen anything like this since the Disney decade in the 1990s. I look at it right now, 2018, as the second year of a 5-year period of time that is going to go through the 50th anniversary in 2021. Last year, Pandora was kind of the first step in this process, and now Toy Story Land is the second piece in putting this together. You know, part of me's really excited to see so much investment in the parks from Disney. There's going to be a lot of things to do that I've never seen before each time that I go in the next few years. It's really going to change how crowds move through the park, where people go, how they spend their time, what attractions become popular, and what are a lot easier to do. I mean, if you include Pandora in the mix, within this 5-year period, all 4 parks will have 1 and sometimes even 2 new super headliners added to their lineup during this time frame. That's incredible, and that shows a high level of investment. Of course, part of the reason we're seeing so much investment is that for a while, Disney didn't invest as much time. Yes, we had New Fantasyland and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, and there have been other changes over the years, like Frozen Ever After, but on an overall scale, they haven't been investing as much in the parks. And then second, you have Universal, who are hanging out right over there, adding Harry Potter, adding Diagon Alley, and seem poised to do a lot more in the near future. I also have a few questions about how the parks are going to function, though, with all of these new expansion. The big issue could be capacity. As these new expansions come, they are going to draw larger crowds. Is Disney ready for this type of expansion? Also, how well are these changes going to fit within the park's overall themes? Is there a theme to each park, or are they all just going to become a collection of IPs? So some of these issues that I've just described are going to hang over what I discussed in terms of Toy Story Land and the studios in general. So I'm going to split this podcast up into 3 basic parts. The first is I'm just going to talk about Toy Story Land. I have not been there, so this is not going to be a review. I'm not going to say this is good or bad, but I feel like I have seen enough, even from afar here in Missouri, that can at least talk about what they may have accomplished with this land and how it looks, at least from my perspective so far. The second part, I'm going to look at the current state of Disney's Hollywood Studios. Now that Toy Story Land is open, what's it going to be like to tour this park in the next, 6 months or so, going towards 2019? Finally, I want to look at the future of Disney's Hollywood Studios. This Toy Story Land is not the last piece, obviously, going into this park with Galaxy's Edge and potentially, hopefully, more beyond that. And what is the studio's place in the Walt Disney World Resort in the next few years? So if this is your first time listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast, this show is going to be a bit different from the normal format, which is typically interviews with experts like Len Testa or Sam Genoway, or people that have worked behind the scenes like Bruce Broughton or Steve Alcorn. This is just me talking about what's currently happening in the parks and how I feel about where they may be heading in the future. But I will definitely be back soon again later this month with more interview podcasts that are the typical format of the show. But before we do that, let's talk about Toy Story Land and Disney's Hollywood Studios. All right, so like I mentioned at the top of the show, Toy Story Land did officially open on Saturday, June 30th, and a lot of people were actually able to ride it on Friday. Now, this land has two attractions. One, which I'm excited to ride, is the family roller coaster Slinky Dog Dash, and then there is the flat ride Alien Swirling Saucers, which is basically a spinner that whips you in circle, kind of like Mater's Junkyard Jamboree at DCA. So the basic theme of the land is you've been shrunk to the size of a toy and you're playing in Andy's backyard. Now, it's not the most exciting theme for me, especially compared to something like the old Hollywood that we see in the park that's kind of going away. But there's still a lot of opportunities for small details here. It's one of those things where if you compare it to something which I've heard others do, I'm not the first to do this, somewhere like Storybook Circus, which I wouldn't say is my favorite theme either, but there's a lot of cool little touches as you walk around that area, and from what I've seen so far, I suspect it'll be the same thing here. So let's start with Slinky Dog Dash. That's a Mack Rides coaster. The ride time is not even 2 minutes. It does look like a fun coaster. It has some cool drops and turns. There's a spot near the end where the car basically hops up and down. Not literally, but going over several quick hills that is almost like a Slinky. I like that there's two launches. The middle one in particular looks like a lot of fun. And it also is going to offer some cool views of the rest of the park, especially when Galaxy's Edge opens. And finally, the animatronic Wheezy at the end singing You've Got a Friend in Me is a really nice touch. It reminds me a lot of Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. Not the way the ride looks at all. There's not a big area in the middle with a bunch of animatronics. But you have a coaster that most people can ride. The height limit is very similar to Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. It also has a really low capacity, which means it's going to have extremely long lines, particularly right now when there's not that much else to do that's new in the park. I mean, Len Testa on a recent episode of the Disney Dish indicated it's going to probably be less than 1,000 people per hour. For a flagship attraction that most people are going to the park to ride, we're talking at a minimum, probably 3 hours. 2.5, 3, it could be even worse. Also, this is an outdoor attraction, which means we're going to have very long lines, and they could go down because of storms having to do with the Florida summer. The queue is pretty much outside. That is going to be super warm for people. People are going to get cranky. Waiting this long for a ride that is not even 2 minutes, it's a bit scary. Now, having said all that, I do think this coaster is a good addition to the park. Disney's Hollywood Studios needs more attractions like this, because even if you look at Sunset Boulevard, an area that I really like, Rock and Roller Coaster and Tower of Terror are not for everyone. There are people, adults, kids of all ages, even when they're well tall enough to ride, may not ride them. Neither is the most intense thing I've ever seen in a park, but for a Disney park, those two attractions are up there. And then you have Star Tours, which most people, again, will ride, but there is a motion sickness component for some people. My wife won't ride it. You add in this coaster that appears to be very smooth. It does have some nice drops, but nothing that I feel like is going to have a negative impact on most people. So I think it's a good addition. However, when you're only adding 2 attractions and one of them that is going to draw the most people has a low capacity, that could be a problem. Now let's talk a little bit about Alien Swirling Saucers, which has an unfortunate acronym, or fortunate depending on your point of view. It appears to have some nice theming. I like the fact that you're riding on this with this little alien sitting right next to you. And it's good that it's covered. It's still outdoors. It's not a dark ride, but it's going to at least give you some relief from the Florida sun. Now, what I've heard is the capacity for this attraction is even lower than Slinky Dog Dash. And both attractions are obviously FastPass Plus attractions, which again is going to really slow the standby wait. A lot of people are all going to try and get Slinky Dog Dash Fast Passes. It's not going to happen for everybody, but the ones who don't are going to go after Alien Swirling Saucers. It's a very similar situation with Navi River Journey and Flight of Passage. These are not really comparable attractions in either case, but you have people that go, okay, I can't get it for Slinky Dog Dash. I'm going to rope drop that. Then I'm going to get my Fast Pass for Alien Swirling Saucers. By that happening, with assuming all those Fast Passes will be gone, it's only going to extend the standby line, because then the people in the standby line are going to move in very slowly for an attraction that doesn't hold that many people. It's a rotating loader, not a continuous loader. It is going to be a challenge. And I don't mean to be too down about this. I don't have an issue with either attraction. I think they're fine. My challenge is really about, I wish they would have added more. Maybe another attraction could have made a difference. I think the theming of the land looks well done. At night, the place looks really cool. It does fit more with the type of theming you might see at Pop Century, the All-Star Resorts, but I kind of like the Pop Century theming. It's like giant, it's over the top, it's gaudy, but that's okay. Kids are going to have a lot of fun here. I could see my daughters really having a great time. Now, there's very little shade, and that could be a problem. I should also mention there is a new entrance for Toy Story Mania, which is now in Toy Story Land. So technically there are 3 attractions in Toy Story Land now. Toy Story Mania is the same attraction. However, we have the 3rd track, which I know the tracks have been up and down while getting ready for this land. So it's still going to have long lines because people are going to want to go into this land. And obviously, again, is a similar Fast Pass situation where it will still have a lot taken. Though it's not going to be the draw in that area because so many people have ridden it and they're going to want to ride Slinky Dog Dash. So I'll be curious to see how the lines really stack up for that. I should also mention that while the food selection is very limited, there is Woody's Lunchbox, which I looked at the menu and some of the options seem pretty cool. The Monte Cristo sandwich, which is of course a Disney classic, the brisket sandwich, and there's some fancy Pop-Tart-like desserts that I think will be fun. They also sell a lot of beer options there and some, adult lemonade and such, which I think some parents may need, especially given the heat in the lines. Now, I don't want to be someone to fall into the trap here of just saying this is only for kids. Adults are going to enjoy this roller coaster. People that appreciate theming, and also just having something new to do at Disney's Hollywood Studios. You cannot underestimate the impact of just having a new land in a park that a lot of people have been skipping. It's going to draw attention from locals. People that go on trips are going to go there. So it will be interesting to see how much impact it has, but I think this land is going to be super popular. The only downside I can really see has to do with capacity. You got 2 outdoor attractions in an area where it's going to be really hot and weather is always a factor. We already saw on Friday there was some rain and people did not look super happy, but it is a new land and I can't wait to see it. All right, so let's take a bit of a broader look here and look at Disney's Hollywood Studios on the whole as of June 30th. Now, the Hollywood Studios has changed so much from its early days as Disney MGM Studios. It's funny. I've been playing this game, Roller Coaster Tycoon 3. It's an older game, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with my daughters, who it's more new to them. And there's a part called Gunslinger that we recently were working on, where it's a scenario where basically you're set up to solve problems. And this is a park that is in really bad shape. So we basically went through and just almost removed everything. Removed most of the rides, most of the buildings. All we left were the 2 popular roller coasters. And then built things up again right around it. And it worked out really well. Now, obviously, the situation in real parks is a lot more complicated. There are some tricks you can do in a game like Roller Coaster Tycoon that you cannot do in an actual situation. But while we were doing this, it does make me think of kind of what Disney's done with Disney's Hollywood Studios. Now, obviously, more attractions have remained. Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster are both from the 1990s. Star Tours did change over, but has been around since the early days in some form, the early days of the park. But with the removal of the Great Movie Ride and with a lot of the other movie-themed things like the Backlot Tour that have been removed, this park is going to look so different than, especially when Galaxy's Edge opens next year. It's going to be like basically a good portion of the park will be different, including Minnie's Runaway Railway. But let's look at where the park is right now. We have 6 rides and 7, I would say, real shows. You have other things like Path of the Jedi or even Walt Disney Presents, which I love, that you add in from there, plus Launch Bay. But in general, you have 6 rides and a few really high level shows, and then a lot of complimentary attractions. So really, if you're looking at it as, I don't really like the idea of half day or full day park, because it really depends who you're talking with. If you're someone who's never been to Disney's Hollywood Studios, as it stands right now, it's easily a full day park. You can go see Indiana Jones, you could do Fantasmic at night, there's the Muppets, all the rides, plus the lines will be long. You could easily spend a whole day at Disney's Hollywood Studios, especially now with Toy Story Land open. However, the challenge there has to do with, do they have enough capacity to hold this? Because everyone who goes to this park is not saying, I'm going to go sit there and see Indiana Jones, or I'm going to go see the shows like, Frozen Sing-Along or Little Mermaid. Most people are going there for these new attractions, plus Star Tours, Jedi Academy, Rock and Roller Coaster, some of the bigger attractions that are there. So does the capacity that is actually going to be used on a regular basis suit what we need? And that's where the Great Movie Ride is so important. And I'm not aware of contractual situations with Turner Classic Movies or even going back with MGM that might have played a role in this closing. So I can only speak with what I know about the park and what it accomplished. The Great Movie Ride was dated. It was a great 90s attraction that could have used a serious update. I still loved it, but part of the reason I loved it is because I went so much as a kid and we rode it all the time. But there had to have been a way that Disney could have made updates to this attraction, even fairly significant updates, and kept that capacity, which was in the thousands of people per hour. That's a huge number, and you could put it right at the front of the park. They could still do Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, and it's going to have a good capacity, but I don't think it's going to be on the level, and you can combine those two, and on a hot summer day with all these outdoor attractions at Toy Story Land and such, having something like the Great Movie Ride, you cannot underestimate the importance of that. Now, I suspect guests are going to flock to the Disney's Hollywood Studios in large numbers this summer. But are these going to be all new guests? Are people traveling to Florida to go to Toy Story Land? They will for Galaxy's Edge. I don't think they are here for the most part. My thought is that they're more likely to be guests that might have spent another day at the Magic Kingdom or especially a day at Epcot. Because if someone's going and they have 3 or 4 days, they haven't gone recently, they're going to want to check out Pandora. They're definitely going to go to the Magic Kingdom. So let's say they're doing 3 days. Let's make it simple. They may skip Epcot, or they may split it up, go to the Hollywood Studios and try to see Toy Story Land, and then go to Epcot at night and do World Showcase. I don't know if it's going to be a huge bump in terms of overall attendance, and Disney probably knows this. The buzz seems to be positive. They're really pushing this on the marketing side. And Toy Story Land's importance will only grow with Galaxy's Edge opening. Now, something that's interesting that came up on Friday during the media event is Disney announced Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy. Now, I try to keep up with most rumors that are coming out, but I had not heard anything about this show. Now, the details of the show right now are let me read to you a little bit of the marketing that the Disney Parks blog has said about this show. Here is the description. At Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy, located near Rock and Roller Coaster, you'll come face to face with racing legend Lightning McQueen, who's excited to showcase what he's learned over the years with you, the next generation of rookie racers. Of course, as Lightning McQueen has discovered throughout his career, things don't always go according to plan, and he has to think fast to get back on course. With friends Tom Maeder, Cruz Ramirez, and the gang from Radiator Springs on his side, Lightning gears up for the challenge. Okay, so this comes out next year. So this is another way that Disney is starting to deal with the capacity issue. Now, this is not a gigantic new theater, so I want to keep expectations in check here. This is the building where for a little while Disney had dance parties. They often do special events there. It's a sizable building, but I don't believe this is going to be something super high tech. However, Cars is still very popular, so it is noteworthy that there's another Pixar attraction going into Disney's Hollywood Studios next year, something we didn't know about. So it's possible there may be something that in the next year or two, there's even more we may be getting in Hollywood Studios that as of right now, we haven't heard anything. And possibly going up to the 50th anniversary, maybe there's another step there. But like I mentioned earlier, what is the theme of this park? Early MGM Studios had kind of two parts. One was like this focus on old Hollywood, and then there was more of the actual studio look that you would go behind the scenes and you had people like Mel Gibson and Pee Wee Herman and Bette Midler, and it was a very different approach. Wasn't a perfect park, but I do feel like they kind of threw it together but had a general theme to it. Now you've got multiple Star Wars attractions and the launch bay already. Then you have Toy Story Land, Sunset Boulevard, you have shows tied to the films of the 90s like Beauty and the Beast and A Little Mermaid, and it's obviously not a studio. You know, it's fine if they want to call it a studio, but all these attractions are tied to films and television. It just seems like a really odd collection of attractions. At some point, I suspect Aerosmith is going to be replaced. So it makes me wonder, like, let's say they replace Aerosmith with The Incredibles, or there's a way to do Guardians of the Galaxy, or something Marvel that they can actually do in Orlando, which I know is limited. What happens with the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror? Because that seems like the outlier. I don't want anything to happen to that, but I kind of look at the park and I'm a little nervous for that attraction. Not in the near future, but as we get closer to the 50th and the years or two after, it's going to be interesting. But on an overall scale, this park is still kind of all over the map. Toy Story Land is helping, but it also has a weird layout. I'm excited about Galaxy's Edge, and I will talk about that a little more in a moment. But viewing the park and what it looks like now, yes, they kind of tore it down to the studs and built it back up. And I'm not going to say for sure what I think until we know more about everything that's going to be in place in the next few years. But knowing what I do now, I think Toy Story Land is helpful for the park. I just think there's a lot more work to do. All right, finally, let's talk about the future of Disney's Hollywood Studios. Now, Galaxy's Edge is the big super headliner land hanging over this entire park and Walt Disney World in general. The Disneyland version is going to open first, likely in the middle of next summer. The Galaxy's Edge at Disney's Hollywood Studios likely won't open almost till the end of the year. That area is going to draw crowds away from everything else in the park, including Toy Story Land. In the recent Disney Dish, Len Testa described Toy Story Land basically like the lobby for Galaxy's Edge. Now, it's still going to be popular due to crowds they're not going to all be able to get into the Star Wars area. And there is still going to be an interest in Slinky Dog Dash for a while and just being in another fun area that a lot of guests might not have seen because they waited to go when Star Wars was open, or they just don't visit every year. So the big question, though, I am super excited for Galaxy's Edge, the attractions, and just walking around the land. One thing I can say about Pandora that surprised me is how much fun it is to just walk around. And it was crowded when I was there, but you're still able to just see everything and think, this world is amazing. I can't believe what they can do. I suspect that Galaxy's Edge will be very similar. The challenge is Star Wars is a lot more popular than Avatar. You really don't even want to make a comparison, despite the box office success of the James Cameron film. So, will the Hollywood studios be able to handle these crowds? The obvious answer is probably no. I think they'll do better than Disneyland. One, because Disney will have learned some things after a few months in California. Also because Disneyland is so much smaller and draws so many locals. The Hollywood studios is going to be mobbed. It's going to be the most popular place to be in the time around Galaxy's Edge opening, and possibly for a year after. It's not going to match the Magic Kingdom, but it's going to definitely be the second most popular park, I feel like, at Walt Disney World. Galaxy's Edge opens. Let's assume the 2 attractions are great. I suspect Disney is going to hit out of the park. The battle attraction had better be amazing, because Flying the Millennium Falcon will be fun, but it's a simulator. It's like a video game type simulator. What I'm excited to do is the immersive experience that you're going to have in that battle attraction. These open. Let's say obviously Galaxy's Edge is a success. I doubt it won't be. What's next? Because Minnie and Mickey's Runaway Railway is supposed to open before Galaxy's Edge earlier in 2019. Then Galaxy's Edge opened. They're up to 9 rides. That's getting closer to what we need. The trick is a lot of these rides don't have high capacities. So the demand is going to go way up. Even let's assume 1,500 people for each Star Wars attraction. So let's say 3,000 total. I know it's not exact. One may have more than the other. That is not enough to handle the masses of people. And you know there's going to be lines, but the lines could be insane for a really long time. So what can Disney do? Obviously, they can add more shows like the Lightning McQueen show I just mentioned. They need, though, to add another headliner. I don't know if they're going to be willing to spend the money, because they're spending money on all fronts across the resort. You've got 2 big attractions being built at Epcot. You've got Tron going into the Magic Kingdom. You have the Skyliner being put in between the resorts. You have other resorts being upgraded. There's a lot of capital investment going around. Will Disney actually add something more? Because you look at what's happening with Pandora, and you can look at that and say, put a headliner in Dino Land, replace Chester and Hester, or even if you had, I believe they have an expansion pad, add a 3rd attraction to the Animal Kingdom. But that's just me throwing money around. I know how much these things cost, and it's a lot. So that's a kind of wouldn't it be cool kind of idea. But if you look at the Hollywood Studios and where it's going to be, I feel like that park with Galaxy's Edge, if they could add one more, it doesn't have to be on the level of the battle attraction. It could be Indiana Jones if they decide to actually not go that way in the Animal Kingdom. It could be another, I hate to say it, another Pixar property. There's a lot of options, especially if Disney ends up acquiring Fox. There may be other things I'm not even aware of that they could do. So I would hope they would do that. I think it would not be likely it's going to happen at the 50th anniversary. It possibly would be something we're looking at a few years after. And the one benefit of the 50th anniversary and the other headliners like Tron and Guardians and Ratatouille is eventually they will pull some people from Galaxy's Edge. That doesn't mean it's not going to be popular. We see it right now. Pandora is still having huge lines. I'll be curious to see how that is impacted when new attractions start opening in the studios. But it's going to be a while. Even with when you've got FastPass, that is more available than ever now with resorts being added and such. 2 hours is the best we can hope for a few years out, and I think that may be pushing it. Looking at other things that are opening, though, I mentioned them. I am really excited about Tron in the Magic Kingdom and Ratatouille in France. And the Runaway Railway sounds like it could be something really innovative and a dark ride that I would like to see. So on an overall scale, there's a lot to be excited about at Walt Disney World. Pandora has shown what Imagineering can do when they have resources and they're not so locked into restrictions of an IP. And I mention that because none of us walk through Pandora and say, well, this isn't like the movie. This isn't exactly like, the Unobtainium was gone or something, which was done in that movie. Now, Galaxy's Edge can't be that similar, but I think because they're doing it in a land we don't know, they're not doing Tatooine or Hoth or anything like that, they're going to have some flexibility there. And I'm excited to see what they do. So Imagineering has done some amazing things. Toy Story Land, there's only so much you can do with that theme. With those 2 attractions, it seems like it's well themed going by the way that it looks. So looking ahead, I think we're going to learn more as the months roll by here. The big one is the 2019 D23 Expo, where we will likely learn more things we're not aware of. And that will really set up the 50th anniversary and what each park will likely receive at that time. There are probably attractions coming by 2021 we don't know anything about. My guess is those are probably not in the studios given what's going on with Galaxy's Edge, but I would love to be wrong. So I'm super curious about where the parks are going to be going beyond 2021, but we are in store for a ton of changes, and I'm hopeful that most of them are going to be top-notch experiences like we've seen recently with Pandora and even with Cars Land in California. It's super exciting, even with all the concerns I've outlined in this half hour. I still think we're in store for a lot of fun as theme park fans. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into the thoughts that kind of fly around in my brain on a daily basis, especially right now while I'm observing what's going on with Toy Story Land from afar. I really want to get down there and see it, but I think I have a pretty good gauge in general on how things are looking at Hollywood Studios. At the moment, a week from now, things could totally change. So like I mentioned at the top of the show, this is a bit different than my normal podcast, but I have more of those coming up very soon. So I wanted to talk about kind of the release schedule and how I'm going to be doing this going forward. So as you know, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, the schedule is not that structured. I typically do about a couple shows a month, but they're not always consistent. It depends especially on guests and when they're available. Now, as you know, this podcast is being released on a Monday. So my thought going forward is that I'm going to release shows on a bi-weekly basis on Mondays. So 2 weeks from now, there'll be another interview show. And the plan is just to continue to do that. Hopefully, this will make it easier for you to follow the show. You know that every few weeks you're going to get a new episode of the podcast. It's also a great reason to subscribe to the show because it's not a case where there's an episode and you think, oh, there won't be one for a few months or something. I'll just jump back in when he has another episode. They're going to come faster. And as you know, life moves quickly. Weeks fly by. So you'll be hearing from me quite a bit, and I hope for you that's a good thing. If you do enjoy it, hey, 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast or other providers, they really help. They make my show a lot more visible to people that listen to other theme park podcasts, and it only helps with growing the show and getting super guests to have in the future. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this podcast. So you can always email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at TomorrowSOC. Shoot me a note on Facebook at Tomorrow Society or Instagram, which is also at Tomorrow Society. The music for this podcast is written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. You can find out more about Adam's music at adamhucke.com. He's got a really good album of pop and rock songs that I would definitely suggest you check out. And of course, the Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. You've just gotten a glimpse of the thoughts that roll through my mind every day. It may be a scary place, but if you like what you hear, I hope you'll stick around for future episodes. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you again later this month.